All right, I am live here with an amazing guest. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. He's a storyteller, he's a podcaster with a really, really interesting and fun podcast. He's an author, and he is the real deal. Welcome to the show, Francisco.
You've talked me up too much, Oscar. It can only go downhill from now, my man.
Okay. Let me talk you down then, because I know you're going through a really, really tough time this week. So yeah, it's hell week for you. I know. It's one thing you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. You have the kids an entire week
I do.
for
I do.
yourself. What's
I
your plan? How are you going to survive? Well, I want to hear as a dad.
it's I would be lying if I said it's just myself. My wife is around, but I don't know how people do this. Like I have a lot of friends who live in the UK, and I'm afraid to ask how they've managed to cope throughout this year because my daughter, bless her, she takes her, I think, 2 or 3 days to get it out of her system that she wants to play with us, but every 2 seconds she wants attention, she wants to play. If I call someone, she immediately stands by the computer or the phone and goes like this, or she starts saying like, "Daddy, I just need to tell you something." I was like, "You could have told me 2 seconds ago, but why are you telling me now?" So yeah, I just find that I spend most of the week just feeling like going ah, which is not very productive.
No, you look forward to Monday morning where you can start relaxing.
Oh
Is that
yes.
true? Yeah, Monday
Well,
mornings
yeah.
are those are the best.
Yes, Monday. I think for anyone with children, we know that the holidays are Monday to Friday. I mean, no
Yeah,
question about that.
yeah. Cool, man. Cool. Anyway, I got a special question for you because, yeah, we're kidding a little bit around. Obviously, you having a week here. I know you read a book about some people way up north where it's cold, it's dark. And when people come here from the south of Europe, they tell us that they're introverted, they're not very open, but apparently they are very happy. At least
Mhm.
some people say that. And I know you read a
Yeah,
book about that. So I don't know, can you use it for this week? And what are some of the things you've discovered about Danish people?
yeah. So the book was my year of living Danishly,
Mm.
about this British journalist whose husband gets a job at Lego. And for those who don't know, Lego is from Denmark, but it's not Copenhagen, where you would expect. They are based in like the boondocks of Denmark, which is saying something. So it's just a very strange place. And she decided to find out why were the Danish so happy. Um, and it's very interesting as a cultural discussion about different people, but most of the stuff that your people do is just mental. Like just the amount of like darkness and cold you have to put up throughout the year. It's no surprise that you perhaps drink a little more than some of us do, and you get into all sorts of weird things like being super protective of your flag, and some other weird things. I'm not sure how much I can. I think what I mostly got out of that book is that people are very strange, but if you live in a country that is very dark and it's very cold, and you still manage to be happy, then it's more what are the things you decide to be happy about and what are the things that you let get to you than the actual facts of life.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, yeah, we do have a lot of darkness, and luckily things are getting better now. So I think a lot of things people experience this, especially in the spring. Things are changing, and the mood gets better. So very cool, Francisco. We got a comment here from Alain Tremblay. Enjoy it. Nothing is more productive than raising your kids. So true. Nothing is more productive, and nothing is more wonderful if you can have other people take care of your kids so you can be productive with other stuff. Anyway, cool, Alan,
Yeah.
you're here.
Mhm.
Anyway, if you got a comment, Alan, any questions to
Mhm.
Francisco about storytelling, public speaking, how to get started with it, throw in a comment. Great to have you on board. Anyway, Francisco, I want to know a little bit about you because I read a little bit about you on your webpage and so on. And you haven't always been a professional storyteller, keynote speaker, and trainer. I know for many years it was like a hobby kind of thing. You were probably going to Toastmasters and doing speaking gigs around, maybe for some pocket money and doing it for fun. But there was some time in your life where things changed. You said, okay, I got to try this. I got to do this. So I would love to hear, what was the moment where you kind of said, okay, I want to give this a go. I want to give it a try. Let me hear.
Sure. Yeah. So what happened was that I grew up in Brazil.
Mm.
I was raised by my mom, and although we never lacked for anything, but we didn't have a ton of money. And my mom made a big sacrifice to put me in a super fancy private school, which was great. But then when everyone in your school has more money than you, particularly when you go past the age where you use a uniform, then you can never buy the sneakers, you can never buy the clothes that your friends wear, you can never go on the school trips, and that was something that annoyed me. I always had this idea that, like, I need to make more money. My life would be better if I made more money. And Brazil it wasn't a great place to do that when I was growing up. So as soon as I could, I worked hard, I saved a lot of money, and I left. So when in my early 20s, I left Brazil and I came to Europe. And I did all sorts of weird jobs. I worked at nightclubs. I was a waiter. I did all sorts of call center work, all sorts of stuff, until I eventually got into, of all things, finance. And I became a financial advisor, and and it was a very good job. And I started making very good money, and I sort of felt, okay, I've made it, right? All this stuff that I worried about growing up, I've done it. I've got a job. I've got all the money that I need, and I married my high school sweetheart. We moved to Barcelona. We had a kid, and in life, in theory, was great. But the truth is, and this might not come as a massive surprise to you, knowing that I was a financial advisor, is that I was bored. It was a very good job. Everything else was great, but looking at spreadsheets all day and helping rich people become richer is not really the type of thing that has you waking up, bouncing up and down with energy. And the time that I really felt more alive and more fired up was when I was speaking in public. I had gotten into that a few years before, and I really liked it. I competed, I won some stuff, and some friends of mine would say, "Listen, you're good at this stuff. Now, why don't you do this professionally?" And I'm like, no, but the job, it's good money. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't. And I kept putting it off, and I kept putting it off, and I kept putting it off. And then the moment was that, so a couple of years ago, my wife woke me up one morning in tears, and she said the scariest thing I'd ever heard, which was, "Francisco, I'm pregnant again." Now, it kind of sounds funny, particularly because we should know how these things happen, given that we're grown-ups and we had a kid already, but apparently not. And as soon as we got over the shock, it just really hit me. I'm about to have a second kid. We're married, 2 kids, a good job. This is my life now. This is the rest of my life. I just saw the rest of my life.
Yeah,
And
that's another 20 years.
And I couldn't shake the feeling that there's got to be more than this. Like I this can't be all the excitement I'm never gonna have in my life is doing exactly what I'm doing now. And that was sort of the light bulb moment for me to say, you know what, all this speaking thing that I've been spending a lot of time and energy in, but never taking it really seriously, now is the time to do that. And it was the worst possible time because, with a second kid, and it was just before the pandemic started. But I'm very glad I started. And even though it's been a very difficult year and a half to be doing this, there's just no. It's so difficult to explain to people how much difference it makes when you're doing something that you're really passionate about, that you feel you can make a difference by doing. I struggle to understand how I spent so long putting this off, but here we are now.
I think a lot of people can relate to this. I definitely can. I remember my own story was I also spent probably 5.5 years at university, and then the first day at work, looking into a spreadsheet, being an engineer, I was like, what? I studied 5.5 years to figure out frequencies when things are gonna be messed up, and yeah, it took me a long, long time also to to pursue my passion. So super cool. We got Raj with us here. Hey, Oscar, it's lovely to watch you as always. Super cool you're with us, Raj. You are so awesome. He's writing. Anyway, let us know if you got a comment. Raj sitting in India. Super cool. We have people joining from India as well. Awesome. Great story, Francisco. So I guess did you feel a lot of fear, nerves, kind of taking that step? Did you have like where you quit your full-time day job and then go straight into your own business, or do you have a transition period where you could kind of?
Yeah, so no, not really. No, I mean,
Mm,
I think the fear was all before. So
mm,
all the fears I had were some of them were justified, some of them were not. But I think I spent years putting it off because I was afraid of certain things, and and when I took the step, I have concerns. I have
sure.
challenges,
Yeah.
but I know what going back to what I was doing looks like. Uh, so the worst case scenario is where things were before, but I don't think that's realistic, because even if it takes longer than I wanted for it to really take off and maybe replace what I was doing, it's fine. I'm already getting plenty out of the process, so not really. But no. So as far as the transition, so what I've done is, and I'm lucky I did it this way. I didn't just quit everything and started, a completely new career from
Mhm.
scratch. The decision I made was, I have responsibilities as a husband, as a father. It didn't make any sense to me, particularly when my job doesn't take that much of my time normally.
Mhm.
I'd say, okay, well, I'll keep doing the job and be very focused when I do it, and I'll still free up a lot of time normally to do this new thing, and I'll do it in the evenings, and I'll do it on the weekends, and
Mhm.
then I'll start letting it take over more of my day. And I'm glad I did it, because obviously launching yourself as a speaker or a trainer when the pandemic was hitting, it would have just been completely financial suicide. So I didn't do it,
Yeah.
and eventually I would expect that this business will take over the other one, but I'm not in any massive hurry. If it takes a little longer, I'm not concerned and making bad decisions because I'm desperate to bring money in. So there's that as well.
Super cool. I mean, really great advice to have here from Francisco about how to transition. I mean, because I often hear that there are two, you can say, paths to changing your career. One is burn all your boats and
Mm.
just go all in, or there's a slow route. And a lot of times you hear these motivational gurus, just go all in, you got to do it and push through. Whereas it's great to have you and just hear, you know what, this works for you. You
Mm.
can take it a little bit slower, especially because you have kids and a wife and probably a house and
Mm.
things you have to pay for. It would be different if you were 22. You would probably live in a cardboard box and work in the weekend
Mm.
in a grocery store, right?
I've,
So
I've,
super
I
cool.
guess, I guess you've already heard the story of my of my younger years.
No, I haven't. I actually want to know a little bit about them. But
Uh,
before, I just want to say hi to Maya Julovic. Hello from Serbia. She writes, always looking forward to hear more real stories. Super cool to have you with us, Maya. If you have any questions, we have the expert in the house right now, Francisco. He's a storyteller. So if you got anything you want to hear, questions about how to tell stories, find them, whatever is on your mind to everybody listening here. Super cool. Yeah. And I saw on your webpage, you wrote that when you were 10, your English teacher asked you to present in front of the class, and you said yes. And then when you were 20, you got a job where you also had to speak. But the story doesn't say anything how it went. So I would like to hear this thing about public speaking, storytelling. Was it something that was just natural for you, or you were naturally good at it, or was it something you more worked at and was trained?
yeah, it's a difficult question, because
Okay.
there's always the tendency, particularly with anyone that works with story, to go back and find the perfect justification of, oh, I did this thing, and because of this, story has always been a part of my life. It is true that I've always been a massive nerd, and I always like reading a lot. So
Mhm.
literature has always been a big part of my life. That has always been the case. It's also true that I was never afraid of speaking in front of other people. Speaking in front of one girl, terrified. In front of 30 people in a class, no problem.
Sure.
So So that was always the case. I was always whenever you did this like group projects and one person has to go in front of the class and present, I was always like, sure, fine, I'll go and present, no problem there. So I always had that as part of the things I did. I always trained. I was always the manager that did the training for all the new staff and ran the meetings. But when I got into public speaking, I think it took me quite a while to realize the whole storytelling thing. I actually just realized it much later, because when I was deciding, okay, I want to do more speaking, I want to take this thing professionally, I was trying to figure out, okay, but what am I going to do? What is my focus here? Am I just going to talk about speaking? You and I have mutual friends that dedicate themselves to that, like Florian Mook. And I thought, okay, well, do I just want to do what he does, but with my own style? And as I started looking into it more, I realized that every single speech that I ever gave in a competition that got me far, every single speech that people that know me say, oh, that one about the rat, they were always stories. Like the common factor between them was always a story. And there's some other things you do when you do public speaking. It's not the same as storytelling, but they were always stories. And the more I started looking into that, the more that felt like a natural way of communicating to me. So I work a ton at it. I still work a ton at it. I read. My podcast is my storytelling MBA for myself. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. But now it's becoming way more natural than it used to be 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, cool. Great to hear, because sometimes we get a little bit lost and we see people doing so well, and it just seems so natural to people. So it's really nice to hear the process behind that you actually did spend a lot of time and did some training. And I think your podcast is amazing.
Have you ever seen a duck under the water?
Probably not.
Right. So if you ever had a chance to see a duck, but you submerge yourself and look at a duck.
Yeah.
The duck looks really cool, as cool as a duck looks above the water, and they're just chilling and slowly moving around. Under the water, they're just paddling like mad. Right?
Yeah, that's probably a little bit the same when we're on stage, trying to do a lot of things and just keep calm. We got a question here from Alan Tremblay. Do you ever censor yourself? I guess that is to Francisco. Do you ever censor yourself? Do you ever like, hey, maybe I'm too much at the moment. I should, tone it down a little bit. What's your thoughts on this?
I think I probably should censor myself a lot more than I do. I have a sense of humor that tends towards the juvenile, and that perhaps social media is not the best place for me to be applying that type of sense of humor. But not really. No, actually, this is a weird thing, because I've been told recently that on social media, me saying anything sort of emotional or sentimental, or even something that is not funny, is kind of off-brand. But I wrote a whole book called Bear, A Guide to Brutally Honest Public Speaking. So there's no shortage of like super vulnerable things that I've done when speaking in public. So it's not a question of censorship. Sometimes it's just a question of what's going to get the job done. If you're trying to get a message across, some audiences are going to respond really well to something very vulnerable or something very raw, something very personal. With some audiences, perhaps that's not what's going to get the message across. So, these are all tools to communicate. You're not doing it for you, you're doing it for the audience. So you need to pick your weapons well. Otherwise, you're doing it for yourself, and that's not really the point.
That's a really good point you have there. That we need to think about our audience first. So you say, do you censor yourself? Yeah, well, maybe in some situations, if it's necessary, and others probably not. And we got Ellen here with another question. Any messages? Do you have favorite subjects? There's something when you go out and speak, because you're a brand, you brand yourself in storytelling, but even within storytelling, you can niche it down. You have something where like, this is my specialty within storytelling.
This is something I'm still working out, because the most common way to niche down when it comes to storytelling is, who do you focus on? Because there is storytelling for branding. So what I'd like to think of external storytelling. So you were using it for sales, you're using that for advertising. So that's one type of storytelling. There is another type of storytelling which I think more of as more internal, which is leadership and culture. I tend to like those areas more. I tend to find that it's more because what I really like about stories are the small stories. I find that the
Mm.
small personal stories are a more natural way of communicating, and that's what I like. I like when storytelling stops becoming a tool and becomes a language. That's one of the things that I like trying to teach people to do, and that works it more easily internally because it's just the day-to-day of a company than
Mm.
say, okay, this advertising piece or this is your sales pitch now. But I like working with story and with communication, so all of that is
Mm.
it's all interesting in its own ways. But I think I'm gonna end up finding that my style resonates more with one of these types of
Yeah.
people, and maybe some specific industries, and then I'm just gonna do more work in those areas.
Yeah, cool. I mean, and also I think it makes sense you focus on the cultural part because I know you have such a diverse cultural background being from Brazil, and I know you have some Italian in you too, right? And
Yes,
now you live in Barcelona,
I
and
am I'm the crap version of Jason Bourne. I have I have many passports but no
yeah.
skills.
All right, no, that's not true. That's not true. So cool, man. You've been too humble here, Francisco. We got a question here from Kirsten Reimers. Awesome, you're joining in, Kirsten. Wonderful. It is so nice with storytelling instead of control because it is to be sensed in the body instead of, anyways, being in the head. We need to dig into it. Have you any good advice how to start? How do you get started with storytelling? Because that's a question for me as well, because a lot of times if I'm out in a company and
Yeah.
say, oh no, we just need the information,
Mm.
and in reality, they want the story. Maybe they don't know it,
Yeah.
but how do you get started and don't come across as, oh, here's Little Red Riding Hood
Sure.
kind of story?
Sure.
Yeah, what's your thoughts on this?
Let me ask you a question before I answer
Sure.
that. Almost everybody I know has some uh, television guilty pleasure. So there's the TV show that is kind of embarrassing that you like, but you really like it. Like you probably don't like you don't want to watch it, but if it's on, you will sit down and you watch it. Now, for me,
Yeah.
that is like property shows, like home improvement shows and things of
Hmm.
that nature. What is it? What is it for you?
For me, I mean, sometimes, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, we have this stupid program in Denmark where people that have lost all track of their finances, just taking SMS loans and
Yeah.
like, how much do I owe? Yeah, I don't know, maybe 100,000, maybe $200,000. Not really sure. And yeah, sometimes if you do the zapping, we stop there, and for some reason it makes me feel good because like they are just so
Mm.
lost. I'm not rich,
Mm.
but compared to those people, I probably am. So a
Yeah.
little bit embarrassed to that there's some part in me that makes me feel better, like
Mm.
seeing their misery, right?
Right. So stories are a bit like those guilty pleasures in that you like them, but if someone makes it too obvious that this is what's coming up now, you're gonna find a reason not to. You're gonna go, oh no, I don't want to sit down and watch any TV shows. So you have to catch people unawares. Like the TV has to be on when you come into the living room, and then you will sit down and watch it. And the story is kind of the same. When people say, because you talked about Red Riding Hood, the moment you say, "Let me tell you a story," what you've done is instead of the part of the brain that loves stories turning on, you've turned on the part of the brain that that knows that most of your friends cannot tell stories, that every time someone says that, they're going to tell a horrible anecdote, or they're going to go back to their childhood, and that's not what they want in a business context. So you need to bypass that, never ever announce that it's a story. Even if you try to convince a company that they should tell more stories, you can call them real life examples or experiences, and then you get past that resistance. So how do you get started? The very first thing I think everyone should do, and this doesn't matter if you want to get into storytelling or not, is before you story tell, you need to story listen. because one, you don't realize how often you come across stories. So stories are this weird thing that Francisco Mahfuz does on LinkedIn, or the stuff you watch on Netflix, or the stuff your parents did to you when you were a kid. But it's not. You talk to your friends, and most of the time you're talking stories. You say, did I tell you what happened to me last week? That's a story, right? Oh, did you see this thing about the ship in the Suez Canal? But it's a story. Like,
Yeah.
you are talking about things that happen in real life. You are telling stories. So just keeping an ear out, and you can write down how, oh, someone just told me a story, right? So you start kind of paying attention, and you, when you read something, when you listen to a podcast, you go, oh, this oh, how I built this, it's just a show about stories, right? And then you start realizing how much they're all around you, and I think that's the very first point, because then you can do the next thing, which is you start writing down stories, both from other people and your own. Like, stuff will happen in
Mhm.
your life and you go, there's a story here. Like, I just took my kid to school and I got the wrong bus on the way back, and then this weird thing happened. That's a story, right?
Yeah.
So you start writing down things that happen to you, and now you start having stories to tell. You still have to develop them, but you now start having stories to tell. I've seen people suggest that what you should do is do it daily. So at the end of every day, you say, okay, what was the one thing that, if I had to tell a story, gun to my head, I had to tell a story about today, what was the one thing I'll tell someone that was interesting or funny or weird, right? Um, so it's just getting into this habit. I don't do it every day necessarily, but every time I come across anything, I put a note on my phone, and I would
Mhm.
say, whatever, got the wrong bus coming back from work. Okay, and I'll know what it is. And the next time I'm looking for a story, I'll go, oh, this actually is about not doing things and not paying attention, and
Mhm.
so write stuff down. So that's the story listen 101, right? Listen for them, collect them, and then
Yeah.
the next step is just don't make a point without a story. They got a point to make. Think
Mhm.
of an example. Okay, I want to say that people should do this particular thing when they speak in public. Instead of just telling me that, think of an example of when you or someone you know did it or didn't do it. Tell me the
That's
example, and then you go on about the theory behind it or whatever. That's it. I mean, that's
yeah.
all a story is, right? Is a real life example.
That makes a lot of sense, and toning it down, because sometimes telling a story can be some. We got to tell a story. It's just an example of you achieving something, overcoming a struggle.
Or
And I'm
not,
sure if we mention examples,
or
people will be
not.
like, "Oh, no problem. I got tons of
Yeah,
examples."
yeah.
Isn't that your experience when you're out?
we I think most people tend to think they have no stories, or
Mm,
worse, that they have no good stories. But it's because it's because they're making a very basic mistake. And that mistake is that they think that the external circumstances of the story are what matters. It's not. It's how you felt about the story,
yeah.
or the lessons you learned about the story. So this is a common example that everybody that talks about storytelling uses because it works. When you climb Everest, for example, so some people say, oh, I climbed Everest, now I got a story to tell. I don't want to climb Everest. Like, I have no interest in it. And I think
Mm,
after hearing a story about climbing Everest, I have less of an interest in it. So why would I bother listening to your Everest story? Because your Everest story only makes it only about this challenge you've overcome.
mm,
Your story about Everest becomes interesting to me when you phrase it, when you tell it in a way that it's about the challenge, about the fears you felt. Because I have challenges in my life, I
mm.
have fears. I fear that I'm not going to be good enough for certain things. And when your story becomes about that, then I can relate to it. And you don't need to climb Everest to have that story. I mean, you can have that story because you were trying, we were talking about children earlier. We can have that story because I sat down to do some homework with my kids, and maybe I behaved terribly, and I got frustrated, and I raised my voice, and all of a sudden I was concerned I'm a terrible father, right? And we have other people have that concern. Other people might have a concern that is more business related, about the stuff you don't think you're good enough for. So it's not a story about my kids. It's a story about not being good enough for something. And that's the key. Is there is a lesson or a feeling associated to every single thing that happens in your life if you know how to look for it. When you know how to look for it, you're never going to run out of stories to tell.
That's really some really solid advice. I really like that, taking the example of going to Everest and thinking, wow, it's that, that's the external story. Whereas the real interesting things you mentioned is actually what's going on inside ourselves. So that could be a fear where we can relate to that. How did you feel going up there? Maybe we felt scared for a job interview, or I don't know, raising two kids or three kids. How does that make you feel? And maybe we can relate to that. So I guess that's the point, really. Make it relatable. And often the inside story, the internal challenge, is more interesting
Hmm.
because in many ways we are similar. And why should we listen to an Everest story if we're not going to climb there?
That's exactly the point. There is this what is this quote from Anna Karenina, I think, that Russian novel, and it's something like, all happy families are the same, uh, but all unhappy families are unique in their own way. And
Yeah.
I think I actually disagree with this quote, because I
Okay.
think that we're both happy and unhappy in the same ways. The circumstances may change, but the things that I think there's only six basic emotions that every human
Mm.
being feel. It's love, it's fear, it's hate, it's disgust, it's greed, and I can't remember the other two now. But they're the same. Whatever problems you have in your work, in your life, in your relationships, in your family, they're all going to go back to those same basic emotions. So if you can identify the emotion, then you have a story that other people can relate to. And sure, it does help if the context of your story is also relatable. If I'm talking about school, maybe school in Denmark was very different than school in Brazil, right?
Yeah.
But you probably either had one of those chairs with the arm where you write on, or you had the desk that had either some metal bars beneath to put your books, or it had like a thick wooden board beneath, and that's where your books went on top of. Right now, it could
Yeah.
be this one. It may be a slightly different desk, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Yeah, I can totally relate to it because I heard your last podcast and with Alan. I think it was called Alan, right?
Yeah.
And he talked about how he transitioned from accounting into
Mm,
public speaking.
mm,
And see, I'm an engineer, and
yeah.
I remember his story because he struggled. I studied so much, I spent so much time on
Yeah.
this. I'm so good at this, and I could
Yeah.
totally relate. How can you change career having spent so much time in one field, then going over to another field? So that was
Yeah.
so relatable, and
Mm,
that gave me some confidence to say, Asker, just keep pushing through. He's so good. So I just looked at it. So there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to go very far if I look up the process he did,
yeah.
other people. But we need to hear these stories
Mm,
rather than just the advice. Is yeah, everybody can do it. We can all go to
yeah.
Instagram and get a good quote and feel good for a minute and we forget it. But that story that stuck with me from that podcast
Mm.
because it related to me.
There's in the book Made to Stick, they talk
Mm,
about story, Chip and Dan Heath. They talk about stories, and there's this paragraph that I always think about is they say that stories have two main purposes. One
mm,
of them is simulation, and the other one is inspiration. So first is they're giving you the tools to simulate someone's behavior. So they're giving you the knowledge of how to do something, right? So it's this idea of I'm a caveman. I just went into the woods. I saw a saber-toothed tiger there, and this is how I escaped. So now now you have knowledge that there was a saber-toothed tiger there, and this is how you don't avoid getting killed. Simulation. And the other thing is inspiration. Is they inspire you to take action because you
yeah.
can see how other people have achieved certain things. And this is the thing about stories that it should be so obvious by now, but it still can be surprising. Is you listen to someone else's story, and now you understand them better, but you also understand yourself better because you now see a way out of some of the problems you have that you never thought of before. And that's one of the main reasons why stories are very powerful as a way to communicate, but they're also a very powerful way for us to learn how to be human beings, because that's how they evolved.
Yeah, true. I mean, it's a good point. You say it should be so obvious, but for me, it actually took a lot of years to understand that storytelling is the key.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I heard it all the time going on YouTube, reading books. You got to tell stories, but I never really understood why.
Mm.
And you just shared one of the big reasons why, and that was one of the things that made me like, this is the reason. Like, it's a simulation
Mm.
because we only have that much amount of time in our lives to go out and do things. So if we read about someone doing something or we hear a story about something, our brain is capable of putting ourselves in that situation, and it's almost as good as doing it ourselves. And I mean, the research is out there. If we're simulating things, we are growing the brain connections. So
Yeah.
it's really a way of learning and just going to a new level. And instead of, yeah, probably spending thousands of
Yeah.
money, a lot of money on certain things, why not get the story, get the experience, or cheaper, faster?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw, I think it was Jason Reed, which is another storytelling speaker, and I think he might have called stories prehistoric virtual reality. It's the way
Yeah.
of the brain to learn all of these things without having the time, the trouble, and the risk and the energy expenditure of doing it all by yourself. You need to get someone else's experience somehow, and the way we biologically evolved to do that is by sharing stories. That's what their original goal was.
Yeah. True. I've got a great question for you on that. But first, I want to hear from you what your thoughts on Alan Tremblay's questions.
Mm.
How would you talk about biases? Does it make sense? Biases. Let's say you come
Yes.
into a company
Yeah.
and you know what they need, but they don't. Maybe, for instance,
Okay.
they're a little biased towards one
Yeah. So
solution.
so there's a work that I've become a lot more familiar with over the last year from the guys from Anecdote, which are a big
Mm.
story consultancy firm, and they used to call them story circles. Now they call them anecdote circles, and the work is that you are creating an environment where you're encouraging people to share experiences or stories, because you're trying to get a real picture of what a company is like. So again, this is the whole show don't tell. So you go into a
Yeah.
company and you're trying to find, why are things working the way they're working, for good or for bad? How are projects? What are people really? What do people really feel about how projects are being run? How the company works? About the company's culture? And one way of doing it is you go there as a consultant and you look at all this stuff and you interview people and you do polls and you show that you give the company the results, right? These are the results of this poll of your employees and whatever. Unsurprisingly, that doesn't tend to move the needle a great deal. Whereas if you sit with a whole bunch of people from different departments, you create a safe environment and you allow them to share their stories, you can go back to the leadership and say, this is what really happens in your company. This is what people really think about your biases, the way you approach whatever topic you approach, how leadership works, how the company culture operates. And then you shouldn't have to do almost any heavy lifting, because this is sort of the undeniable proof that this is what it really is like. Like you might want to think that is one way, but it's not. Now, even if this is a perception that is not 100% accurate, it is the perception. Your people think this of your company. And this works better internally than externally, obviously, but because you can control it so much what the messaging is. But once you use story that way, it becomes very difficult to argue with these things. And that's one of the problems with biases, or any discussion about biases, is in theory, you don't know you have them, and you're resistant to the idea that they're influencing your behavior. But when you start getting example after example after example of biased behavior, it becomes much harder to argue against it. So that's one way of using stories to handle the perception or not of biases, and hopefully trying to change some things for the good.
That's really cool. That's a really cool way to discover how are people feeling, what are their values, and really digging deep. Just hearing the stories from the people. I think everybody should do that, combined with the annual research or surveys they're probably making,
Yeah.
because yeah, stories put a little more, soul to it. And
But
like you said,
here's what's crazy, right? Everybody already does it. They don't call it a story, and they don't apply it to this type of environment. And this is how you do it. I
mhm,
explain something to you, and you don't quite get it. Like
yeah,
I gave you the theory, and you don't quite get it. What are you going to ask me for?
if I don't get it,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
well,
kind of say, so I say,
how
oh,
do I do
so
it?
this is,
Give
yeah,
me an
how do I do it?
example.
Give me an
Yeah,
example,
yeah, yeah,
right? So
yeah,
we all do it normally. It's our go-to for understanding is give me an example. Once you
yeah,
give me an example, I can figure it out better. But,
yeah.
both in this context we were just talking about, but also in plenty of other contexts,
Mm.
people still insist on leading with a theory, leading with the facts, leading with the figures, and then sometimes you don't even create an environment that allows for someone to say, but what is the example?
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I remember the math classes I had back at the uni. Like we would always start with the proof, and the
Mm,
proof is the hardest.
mm,
And then you do all the hard part of the proof and understand. And then later you have the example and be like, oh, that letter means that.
yes,
Ah, that one goes there.
yeah,
So it would have been a better way, like you suggest, giving
yeah,
a lot of examples first and then working your way up to maybe the
yeah.
proof if you need to do that. And we got Luis with us here. Ooh, double trouble. My friends, happy to hear from you. I am on. Luis is such a great guy, sitting in Lisbon. And I believe you also had a podcast. You were LinkedIn Live with him.
Yes, I made fun of the Portuguese language as spoken by Luis's people,
Ah, yeah, you're
the
Brazilian.
greatest colonizers of all
Yeah,
time,
you know,
and
he probably thinks Brazil is a great country because it used to be Portuguese.
yes,
Yeah, I don't know. And we have Vinay Yangra here. Hi, Aska Lindholt. Anyway, throw some questions. We would love to hear from you. Good. We went a little bit into the brain, how the brain works.
mm,
And we know, like you mentioned, that the brain loves a story. We
mm,
are hardwired for stories. If we don't get it in a story format, we'll change it. Like you say, give it to me. We don't know we need the story. But why do you think, I mean, why aren't we telling more stories? Why aren't we doing it if it is in our DNA
mm.
more in a business context? Because we do it at home, we do it with our
Yeah.
kids, right?
So do you remember? Do you ever watched Charlie Brown or Snoopy? I forgot the name of the Peanuts.
No, no, I'm not sure I know the English names of the cartoons. You're talking about
Okay,
cartoon,
yeah.
right? Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
so
more familiar with
Peanuts
the Danish ones.
Peanuts was a super famous cartoon in the US and in some parts of
Sure.
the world but one of the things about Peanuts that I always remember is you never saw the grown-ups. You just saw the legs, right?
Okay.
Yeah, you're just the children and they kind of look up, but you never really see the grown-ups. And so this is kind of a convoluted way of a theory I got, but it's that we think of adults as one thing. Like as we're growing up, we think adults know a lot of stuff. Now, like,
Mm,
they're more confident. They're more certain of themselves. So we have this idea. I had this idea of what a grown up was, and then you become one, or at least you get old enough, and you realize that nothing has changed. Like you're still the exact same person. You don't know anymore necessarily. You don't feel more confident, and I think we struggle with that idea. And one of the things we do to fix that or to compensate that is we create these weird ways of communicating. And this is never more true than when you go into business. Like you're in business, you have one way of speaking that is not your normal way of speaking
mm,
because now I'm a professional or now I'm a grown up. Now, so you create a persona to communicate that is not you. And the problem is that that doesn't work because that sort of adult or professional persona speaks in facts and figures, sometimes uses corporate buzzwords,
mm.
synergies and leverage everything, whatever. And no one talks that way. Like, you never ever explain anything to a friend over a beer or a coffee the way you explain it at work. And a lot of people still resist what I'm just saying now. They go, yes, but work is different. Why is it
Mhm.
different? You're still trying to get yourself understood, or you're trying to influence someone. So shouldn't it make sense to use the most straightforward form of communication, the way that genuinely gets your message across and keeps people's attention, and make sure they remember what you said, instead of all this mumbo jumbo professional business speak that a lot of people love. But we resist it. It's the same with PowerPoint.
Mm.
Can be so powerful, but normally it's used in a very boring way. And people just use it because you believe that that's what you have to do. And then someone goes up there and does a great presentation without using PowerPoint, and people go, wow, I didn't even know you could do that. Yes, you're allowed to communicate well. There's no rule that says you need to do this the worst possible way. Um, so that's one of the roundabout way of saying that we convinced ourselves we should be communicating in a way that doesn't work very well. And the other is that it's fallen out of we've fallen out of practice. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't have children have never consciously told a story in their lives. They tell them all the time to their friends, but they haven't consciously told a story. So they've created this category of a story is this childhood thing, is an entertainment thing, is what a stand-up comedian does.
Mm.
So there's all these barriers. A lot of the job of teaching people storytelling is breaking all those barriers, making you realize that there's stories all around you, that you already tell
Mm.
them, that you just call them something different. And once you do that and you get into the habit of it, because it becomes a habit, then you never told any, and all of a sudden you're telling them all the time. It just becomes your go-to way of communicating, is look for an example, look for a story,
Yeah.
or practice.
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm out, I will also ask them, my audience, have you ever been to a talk with too few examples? And everybody will raise their hand. And then I'll ask, have you ever been to a talk where there were too many
Mm,
examples? And you rarely get a hand up
mm,
because it's hard to share too many examples
mm.
because that's where the learning is.
Yeah.
And the comments are coming in. We got Kirsten here, recognition, love it. And let me see what you're saying. It's so nice with store. What do you have here? Like the Disney cartoons, we laugh inside when we recognize there's so much adapting and being open. You don't need that in storytelling. It's safe, kind of. And
Mm,
we got Luis here. I hate business talk. I used to ask, give me an example of something you
mm,
really care about in your company. If they don't get somehow personal, they are in a
mm,
business model. And we got Elaine here with the questions. A few years ago, I started to say, what am I going to do when I grow up? Cool, cool. Hopefully, we're not growing up too much.
mm.
Hey guys, it's Scared Jan here. To Francisco, do you always use the same stories or do you think of new stories depending on the circumstances?
Both. You
Yeah.
find because it depends on what you do. If you find that some stories work very well for certain things, like for example, right at the beginning of this live, I told what's my story effectively, right? So
Sure.
that's my origin story or my signature story. Now, if I want you to know a little more about me and give you plenty of things to feel related to me or connect with me, that's really the story that I'm most likely going to tell, because it tells you enough about me and gives you enough for us to create a bit of a connection. But not always. If for whatever reason I'm speaking to a group of people and I know everybody has children, I might choose a more, me as a parent story. So it depends on your goal. When you want to connect, you need to find a story that shows people I'm just like you. Okay. And
Yeah.
if you can make that very environment specific, then you should. If I'm going to speak with a whole bunch of accountants or finance people, it would be silly for me not to emphasize the financial side of my background, so they
Yeah.
know, oh, this guy understands the type of work we do. He kind of understands the problems, the frustrations, whatever. So you should look for a story that allows you to connect with people, if that's what you're trying to do. If I'm trying to convince someone of something, then sometimes I know that there's one story that I that describes that point perfectly. Why am I going to keep looking for a different story every time? Like if that one
Yeah.
does the job in a minute or two, then I'll just tell that one. Like for example, something that didn't actually come up here, but when people ask about the facts and the figures, and we talk about emotion and why is emotion the driving force between communication, I can always talk about how in 2012 I went to Thailand and I went to an elephant sanctuary, and we wanted to ride an elephant, but these people were doing it a super nice, ecological, friendly way. So we had to dress like war prisoners and spent all day with the elephant. So we had to feed the elephant and pet the elephant and do all sorts of things. And then they got us on top of the elephant, and I said, so how do I direct the elephant? And the guy was like, well, you don't really. You can pull the elephant's ears a little bit and they might go your way, but most likely the elephant will go wherever the elephant goes. And that was exactly what happened. We were going, it was all nice, and the elephant kind of moves when I ask him to move. And then at some point the elephant decided to have a bath and then stopped in the middle of a mud puddle or a mud pool. I had to get down from the elephant all the way up to my waist and bathe the elephant until the elephant decided they had enough. Right? The elephant is your emotional brain. Me up there, or the mahout up there, is the rational brain. So you can kind of direct it, but if the elephant decides not to go where you want it to go, it won't. And that's what people don't get when you're talking about communication, is the emotions are the elephant. If you're not motivating the elephant to go where you want it to go, it's not the rider, the little guy up there, that is going to get it there. So if I ever have to talk about emotions and the facts and figures and why they don't work so well, I'll probably tell that story because it
Does it
works
really?
it works perfectly well. I have other stories, but that one works perfectly well. And it actually comes from a science book. Like I did the elephant thing, but there is a
Sure.
famous writer that talks about that. So I think it depends. I think if you find yourself in the same context over and over, having the same conversation, trying to overcome the same objections, you need to find the stories that work. And once you find that story, you perfect it. And this is one of the reasons why I talk to people about having their signature story, right? And if you keep telling the same conversation with clients or prospects over and over and over, why are you going to try a new story every time? Find one that
Yeah.
works and perfect it so you can tell it without thinking. And that's going to do you a lot of good. But I post on LinkedIn 3 times a week. I can't keep repeating the same story over and over. So I look for new stories all the time.
I don't know. I mean, if you follow a guy like Brendan Mashar, he shares his story all the time.
Yeah.
The same
Yeah.
story with his car crash. Oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
So he has that so much, and
Yeah.
I think we can share our stories, and I think there's a good point,
Yeah.
really perfecting our stories.
Yeah.
And
But
it never hurts. Sometimes
that's
it doesn't
because
hurt to hear the same story again
it's
because it
because
sinks in.
yeah, 100%. You get a familiarity feeling of like I know this person. Like I'm so familiar with the story now. But there's also the fact that a lot of these people, they're not in the storytelling business. They're not in the speaking business. Most of what they're doing when they tell the story is just connection. They're trying to create a connection, and then they will tell their story. It is different depending on what you're trying to do. If you are in sales, you're probably going to end up having more stories than just your own story.
Yeah.
So it depends. The way to think about it is it's communication, right? If you ever found one way to explain something that works perfectly, you're going to keep using that. But if you find that you have to explain to the same people over and over, you're probably going to end up with 10 different ways, so you're not so boring. So it's both.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, really. If it works, keep doing that thing. Don't change it,
Yeah.
or at least just change it slightly, and then you can always go back again.
Yeah.
Really cool. A lot of good tips here from you, Francisco. I love it. Super cool. Yeah, we're kind of coming to the end, so I want to hear, for the people listening. I know you have a podcast, amazing podcast. And where can we find that? And tell us a little bit about your podcast for the people that are
Sure.
interested to know more about you.
Yeah. So my show is called the Story Powers Podcast. and you can find it everywhere you find podcasts, so Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Expected, all the usual places, on YouTube. And what I do there is, well, it's a show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. So what I do every week is I talk to someone who uses stories in the work that they do. So it's not about people telling me their story. There's plenty of amazing podcasts that do that. What I wanted to focus on is the craft of storytelling. So I will speak to professional speakers. I'll speak to marketers. I'll speak to people that write books, that do movies or advertising. And the idea is to figure out how they use stories to get their messages across, and then try and dissect that in a way that I learn from them, and then everybody listening to them learns from them too. The one thing that is also worth mentioning is that I try to do all of that in the most entertaining way I can possibly do. I don't. It's not like a super dry tactical podcast of 15 different ways to do this. We definitely have a laugh when we do it.
Yeah, I can definitely say yes to that. You have a fun podcast, and you go the extra mile. I mean, when you hear the podcast, you're like, you read the books, you heard some of their podcasts, because typically your guests also have their own podcast. So that's really cool that you go that extra mile, and then we can feel you really try to find a good question and pull it out. And like you're saying, you're trying to attack storytelling from all sorts of angles. So I can just say, go check out Francisco's podcast and Story Powers. And I know you have a book as well on storytelling. I mean, there are thousands of books out there on storytelling, but I would like to hear what's like your unique angle. Like, what makes your book? Why should we read your book besides you're a great writer?
My book is not just about storytelling. Storytelling is a big part of the book, but it's about public speaking. And the approach I took with it was very much, I tried to figure out what are the things that I do well at all when I speak in public, and how do I genuinely believe that that's an approach that other people can learn from, and if so, how do I teach that? So the three things that I do a lot when I speak in public are: I tell stories, I try to be funny, and I'm often very, very vulnerable. And vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean dramatic or sad. Often it's just very self-deprecating humor, very personal stories. And I think those things, if you can do them well, are not only things that will make your public speaking better. I think they are things that it's very difficult to be very good at public speaking if you're not doing those. If you're not telling stories, if you're not vulnerable, if you don't have any type of humor, is probably the one you can probably still do an amazing job without. But vulnerability and stories, it's very difficult to find any good speaker that is not good at those things. So the book is just filled with stories. If you ever read anything I've done or watched any of my videos and you think I'm entertaining, then the book should be a big laugh, because I did my absolute best to cram as many funny stories in there as I could. And I go fairly deep into both the humor side and the vulnerability side. And I've read plenty of other public speaking books, and I think people touch on those subjects. I don't think I've seen anyone go into them as deeply as I did. I mean, I wrote a book that I essentially couldn't find anywhere else, and also the book that I thought it was authentic to the way I speak in public. So if nothing else, the book should be a laugh. I'm willing to give anyone's money back if they disagree.
Yeah, that's cool. And you are definitely a funny guy. I just read your post today about our LinkedIn Live, and I was like, yeah, this guy's pretty funny. And I know you're coming out with some funny videos too on LinkedIn, and I've seen a little bit of your part. So it's a laugh having you. You're good at humor, so definitely check out Francisco's book if you want to know more about storytelling and humor and vulnerability. One of the keys to really connect with people. Anyway, do you have anything here before we finish you want to add to the conversation? Anything you think we missed?
There is this basic saying about storytelling, which I think we kind of touched on earlier, which is never tell a story without a point, and never make a point without a story. That's the thing I would challenge most people to start trying to incorporate into their presentations, into their social media posts, into any type of interaction where it's important for you to get your ideas across, to inspire other people to action, is Look for a real life example, look for a story, yours or someone else's, that makes that point, and then tell that story. I think you'll find that you're gonna see very big impact in how people perceive what you're trying to communicate, and it's fun. It's just a much more fun way of communicating, and it feels natural once you get used to it.
Yeah, true. Because we are born storytellers. All we need to do is kind of get into the story habit. Super cool to have you on the show, Francisco. All right, and thank you to all the guests for all the comments. Yeah. All right, take care. Thanks, Francisco.